In 1984, nuns vanished without a trace from a remote chapel in the California wilderness. 28 years later, Detective Matthew Riley stands before the crumbling altar, drawn not by evidence but by a voice only he can hear. Buried beneath the silence of the church lies something that was never meant to be remembered, and it's calling him by name. Before watching, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting mysteries and untold stories. The road to St. Ilios Monastery wound like a thread of doubt through the craggy wilderness of the Sierra Madres, where the sun seldom reached the forest floor, and silence had waked. It had once been a place of retreat for pilgrim scholars and the devout, but now, in late October of 1996, it was a place of questions, a place of one particular absence. Detective Matthew Riley drove with both hands on the wheel, his knuckles white against the faux leather. The last 12 miles were unpaved, his sedan jostling over ruts and loose gravel, though he hardly noticed the silence in. The car was total, no radio, no talking, just the quiet breathing of a man returning to a place that still haunted him. In dreams he hadn't been back to the monastery in 20 years, not since the funeral. Now he was here on official business and personal. A priest had gone missing. Father Thomas Marin, 62, last seen by his fellow monks just before evening prayers 5 days ago. No signs of struggle. No farewell letter. No suspicious visitors. One moment he was there, the next gone. It wasn't the sort of thing the local sheriff's office had the experience or the nerve to handle. Religious folk, the sheriff had said over the phone, they keep to themselves. Maybe he just took a vow of silence and wandered off into the trees. But the abbot hadn't agreed, and when the archdiocese had asked for someone discreet, someone with history, someone who knew the rhythms of monastic life, Detective Riley's name had been offered. They hadn't known how much history he had with St. Ilios or how deep the wound still went. The trees broke suddenly, and the monastery appeared like something carved from legend. A sweep of dark stone buildings against a backdrop of jagged cliffs, the bell tower rising like a solitary finger, pointing towards God or judgment. The scent of pine was strong here, so was the memory of incense. Riley parked his car beside a row of rust-flecked maintenance trucks and unbuckled slowly. The air was colder than he remembered, or maybe it was just grief wearing a new face as he stepped out. The monastery bell rang. Not the Angeles, not a call to prayer, just one slow, deliberate toll, a death bell. He looked up at the stone tower. The rope swung gently below the belfry. No monk in sight. He crossed himself out of instinct, his fingers brushing the small silver cross beneath his shirt collar. Then he walked toward the heavy wooden doors of the abbey, footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. The doors opened before he reached them. A man stood in the threshold, tall and slender, with a tonsure of white hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to weigh everything they saw. Detective Riley. The man said, his voice calm but frayed at the edges. I am Abbot Jerome. Thank you for coming. Riley gave a stiff nod. Father Jerome, it's been a long time. The abbot's eyes flickered too long, and under sad circumstances, as before. Sad wasn't the word he would have used. Tragic, unforgivable, holy. In that terrible, inexplicable way, Riley stepped into the dim vestibule, where the air was thick with wax and stone dust. His boots echoed slightly on the flagstone floor. The door shut behind him, with the sound of a closing tomb. I won't waste your time, Abbot Jerome said, leading him through a narrow corridor that smelled of damp stone. We've searched every room, every garden, every storeroom and stairwell. Father Marin did not leave by any door. We know no notes. Riley asked. None, no illness, no signs of distress. Not outwardly. Though he was quieter than usual, Riley gave a grim smile. You're monks, how do you measure quieter? The abbot didn't smile. You'll understand more when you see his room. They ascended a narrow staircase that wound like a question around the bell tower. As they climbed, Riley noticed something odd. No birdsong, no chirping, no fluttering of wings, just the wind against the old stones. At the top floor, they paused outside a plain wooden door. Here, Jerome said as he left it. Riley stepped in. The room was austere, a cot, a writing desk, a crucifix, a small bookshelf, and a stone basin of holy water. Everything in its place, nothing disturbed except on the desk was an open book. Not the Bible, a journal. Pages covered in tight, precise handwriting. Riley leaned in, the ink was fresh. He read the last line. There is a voice in the stones. It calls at matins. I'm afraid to answer it. Riley's spine prickled. Matins the midnight office, when the rest of the world sleeps and only the devout keep watch. He turned to the abbot. Did anyone hear anything unusual the night he vanished? The abbot's expression grew troubled. There was something, a sound, not a scream, but something mournful, like singing from far below. Jerome nodded. There are catacombs beneath the chapel, sealed for decades. We do not go there. Riley's eyes narrowed, but he might have, we believed so, until we checked and the seal was unbroken. The detective stepped back into the hallway and looked. Down the long corridor of doors, each leading to a room of prayer, sleep, or solitude somewhere in the ancient bones of this monastery. Something had called to a priest, and the priest had answered. Whether it was divine or damnable remained to be seen. The sound of the bells had always comforted Riley as a boy back then. Before everything collapsed, before his mother's slow death and his father's retreat into a whiskey bottle, the bells of St. Ilios marked rhythm and order. They rang out not just for prayer, but for purpose, for presence. They told the soul it still had a place now. As Riley stood at the edge of the cloistered courtyard, watching shadows stretch across the flagstones, the silence of the bell tower unnerved him. There was no vespers, no evening angeles, only wind threading through the arches. He turned to Abbot Jerome. Why the silence? Even if one of you is missing, the liturgy doesn't stop. The abbot looked away. It felt wrong to go on as if nothing had happened. Riley noted the hesitation. Or did someone tell you not to? The abbot stiffened. What do you mean you're the abbot? You make that call unless someone or something else influenced the decision? Jerome opened his mouth to respond, then shut it again. After a moment, he said, There are 12 monks remaining here. Now 2 have taken vows of silence. The rest, myself included, have heard things at night. What kinds of things? The abbot looked toward the chapel. Whispers, footsteps, voices that come from no direction and every direction, and you still sleep in your cells. Riley asked, We have no choice. This is our home. Riley didn't answer. His eyes were drawn toward the chapel doors, heavy oak sealed with iron hinges. Can I see the chapel? He asked. The abbot nodded. I'll have Brother Clement meet you there. I need to attend to the evening meal. They parted in the arcade and Riley made his way alone towards the chapel. The air was colder now, not with a bite of weather, but with something internal, like a fever breaking. The chapel doors groaned as he pushed them open. The sanctuary inside was dim lit only by votive candles, flickering along the side altars. Rows of dark pews stretched before him like ribs in a stone skeleton. He didn't have to wait long. A door at the far end opened and a monk emerged, older, bald but strong. In the shoulders he moved with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to carrying burdens. He dipped his head in greeting. I am Brother Clement, he said. You wanted to see the chapel. I'd like to see the foundation. Riley replied, the place where the catacombs are sealed. Brother Clement walked to the front past the altar and removed a small carpet beneath the sanctuary lamp. Beneath it was a square of stone, unlike the others, black-veined ancient. There, he said, the old entrance. Riley crouched. The stone bore a carved inscription in Latin, post tenebras spolutum, after darkness. I hope for light. How long has it been sealed? Since the fire? Clement replied, Before your time. Riley looked up startled. You remember me? Clement gave a thin smile. You and your mother used to sit near the organ loft. She sang beautifully. You never did take to the incense, though. Riley nodded, throat tight. She loved this place. She loved God. I'm not sure. He returned the favour. The monk studied him. She didn't lose her faith, only her health. Riley stood what's beneath this stone-old burial vault's monks from centuries ago. A few relics, according to legend. No one's gone down there in generations. And the key lost? Riley asked. Destroyed, Clement replied. After the fire, the seal was meant to be permanent, but Father Maron may have gone down there. That's what frightens us. Riley stared at the stone, something coiling in his chest. The air above the seal was cold. Wrong, he placed a hand on it. It vibrated just faintly, a tremor, or maybe his own pulse, but the sensation was unmistakable, as if something below was breathing. He turned to Clement. Has anything else gone missing? The monk hesitated. Yes, Riley weighted the old relic from the sacristy. Clement finally said, a fragment of a martyr's bone, housed in an ornate reliquary. It was kept locked, but 3 nights ago it vanished. Riley frowned, and no signs of forced entry. None. Riley looked again at the seal. Whispers, missing items, a vanished priest, and now this sense of a hunger beneath the stones. He was about to speak, when the candles at the altar flickered, all of them flames bending toward the seal. As if drawn by breath, Clement crossed himself. Riley stood slowly. "I need to speak to all the monks," he said tonight. "All of them, silence, vow not." Clement hesitated. "That may not be wise," Riley met his gaze. "Neither is waiting." The refectory was cloaked in candlelight. No overhead bulbs, no humming fluorescence, just the long wavering shadows of flame cast across old wood and stone. 12 monks sat in silence along 2 narrow tables, their meals of lentil stew and dark bread untouched. Their eyes were fixed either downward or toward the crucifix at the far wall. Detective Riley stood just inside the arched doorway, his coat still damp from the evening mist. Brother Clement was at his side. As promised, the abbot sat at the head of the table, his features worn with fatigue. "This is highly irregular," Abbot Jerome said softly, his voice carrying none the less. "We do not eat in silence out of rudeness. This is our rule, and a man's missing." Riley replied, "Rules change when people disappear." No one objected. In fact, no one moved. Riley stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath his boots. He took a long look around the room. 12 monks all dressed in the same plain wool habits, but they didn't all carry them the same way. Some sat with posture straight and hands folded, others slumped, eyes flitting nervously, shoulders tight. "I'm going to ask some questions," Riley said. "You don't need to break your vows, just nod, shake your head, lift a hand, that's all." Still no one moved. He focused on one of the younger monks. His face pale, knuckles tight around a wooden spoon. Riley addressed him gently. "Brother Malachi." The abbot supplied Brother Malachi. Riley said, "You were here the night Father Marin disappeared." The young man nodded. "Did you hear anything unusual?" A pause, then another nod. So Riley took a step closer. "What did you hear?" Malachi didn't answer, but his lower lip trembled. Was it human? Riley pressed an animal machinery. The monk's eyes shifted to the abbot. Jerome sighed and spoke for him. "Several of us heard a bell." Riley turned sharply. "I thought you weren't ringing them." "We weren't," the abbot replied. "Where did the sound come from?" Silence then. From the far end of the room, another monk lifted his hand, an older man nearly blind, his eyes clouded with cataracts. "Brother Pius," the abbot murmured. Pius's voice was like parchment, dry and cracking. The bell came from below. A chill moved through the room like a draught from the crypt. Riley crossed his arms. Any other sounds? The youngest monk, barely older than a boy, raised 2 trembling fingers. The abbot said, "Brother Gabriel." Riley nodded at him. "What did you hear?" Gabriel hesitated, then whispered barely audible laughter. Riley blinked from where the boy only shook his head. Riley turned to the group. Did anyone actually see Father Marin after Compline that night? No response. Did he say anything seemed different? Afraid, another monk with a badly scarred hand looked up. His voice was surprisingly deep. "He was in the chapel before midnight, alone." "When was this?" Riley asked. "An hour before Matins. Did you speak with him?" "No." "Did he leave the chapel?" The monk hesitated, then said, "I don't know. I fell asleep." In prayer, Riley walked slowly back toward the front of the room. "You've all lived your lives in service, in silence, in discipline. But something is happening here that doesn't follow any rule or vow." He turned toward the abbot. "You need to unlock that seal beneath the chapel." The abbot's face hardened. "I already told you didn't see the candles bend." Riley cut in. "I did, so did Clement. Something is calling from below, and Father Marin may not be the only one at once." Jerome's lips moved silently. "A prayer, perhaps, or a curse. I've already called in for help." Riley added, "A forensic team will be here tomorrow. We're bringing scanning equipment, ground-penetrating radar. If there's a space beneath that floor, we'll find it. You should not do this." Jerome said, "Some doors remain sealed for a reason." "Maybe," Riley said, "but I don't work for your reason." He left the refectory in silence, walking back into the cloister's cold night air. The fog had thickened. The bell tower loomed above, moonless and dark behind him. The 12 monks returned to their silence, but not their peace. Detective Riley did not sleep. The guest quarters given to him were simple stone walls, a small bed, a wooden cross above the headboard, but it might as well have been a cell in a mausoleum. The silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed against the ears like pressure from beneath water. He lay awake, listening. There were no distant trucks, no night animals, not even the rustle of leaves against glass, just stillness, and then faintly a sound. Riley sat up slowly, eyes adjusting to the moonlit room. He held his breath. The sound came again. Footsteps, soft, deliberate padding across stone, not hurried, not lost, purposeful. He stood and moved silently to the door, cracking it open just enough to peer into the dark hallway. It was empty, but the sound continued. Bare feet maybe, monastic sandals. And then a pause, a whisper too faint to understand. Riley opened the door fully, stepping into the corridor. He didn't bother with shoes, the stone was cold. Under his socks, but silence was more important than comfort. He moved toward the chapel. Each step measured, the shadows danced as a single candle flickered ahead, left unattended in a wrought iron holder by the archway. The chapel doors were ajar. He pushed one open gently. The sanctuary was dim, the light of the votive candles stretching tall shadows along the apse. The air smelled of old incense and cold stone. Someone was kneeling at the altar, a monk, head bowed, shoulders hunched, breathing slow and shallow, almost meditative. Riley stepped closer. Father Marin, no answer. He stepped again. Father Marin. The figure did not move. Riley was close now, close enough to notice that the monk's hands were clenched, not in prayer, but as if gripping something invisible. "Are you all right?" he whispered. The monk's head turned slowly. Not Father Marin, Brother Gabriel, the youngest. His eyes were wide, glassy, not focused on Riley at all. He was staring at the crucifix, above the altar or past it. Brother Riley moved to his side, Gabriel whispered. "He's still down there." Riley stiffened. Father Marin, Gabriel's head trembled as he nodded. "He spoke tonight in the walls. He told me not to answer." He said, "The voice below." "Where's his name?" Riley felt his mouth go dry. "What voice?" Gabriel blinked slowly. "It sings in Latin words, I don't know, but it knows me. It called me by name last night. It asked me to kneel. So I did, but I couldn't get up." Riley grabbed his arm gently. "Are you all right now?" Gabriel turned his face toward him. I think something is rising." A sudden wind passed through the chapel. Not natural wind, not from an open door, a current of air that carried cold, and whispers with it. The flames of every candle arched inward, drawn towards the altar, and from beneath the floor, a sound. 3 notes low, melodic, not quite bells, not quite human voice, not quite earthly. Gabriel whimpered and clutched Riley's coat. "He's not alone." The detective scanned the sanctuary and pulled the monk to his feet. "Come on, we're going," as they reached the threshold of the chapel. Riley looked back for a moment, just a flicker. He thought he saw movement behind the altar, a shift in the shadow, a suggestion of a figure tall and cloaked standing still, where no one had been. But when he looked again, gone. The next morning, broke grey and sullen fog still clung to the pine-laced cliffs, and the air carried the scent of distant snow. A white van rumbled up the monastery path. Around mid-M morning marked, State Forensic Unit 2 specialists stepped out. One was a clean-shaven man in his 40s named Agent Calhoun. The other, a younger woman with dark braids and a skeptical stare, introduced herself as doctors, a structural geoesicist on loan from UC Davis. "Don't usually get called to monasteries," she said, unloading her gear, let alone ones with alleged subterranean hauntings. "I didn't say haunting her," Riley replied. "I said missing person, possible structural anomalies, that's it." "Right," Rhodes said, smirking slightly. "You're the one who called in a possible voice coming from a sealed stone." Riley didn't argue, just scanned the floor. "Tell me if there's a chamber." While they unpacked the radar cart and set up the surface sensors, Riley stood outside the chapel with Abbot Jerome, who had remained stone-faced since dawn. "I'm allowing this," the abbot said, "but under protest noted, whatever you find down there." Jerome continued, "You do so without our blessing. This place is sacred." "So was Father Marin," Riley replied, then added quietly, "And you're afraid?" Jerome met his gaze. "I am not of what you'll find, but of what you'll open inside." The radar scanning began. Dr. Rhodes paced the chapel's length with deliberate rhythm, the device humming softly. A light beep signaled data points, and the screen attached to her belt began to glow with readings. Agent Calhoun reviewed the initial surface map, dense stone bedrock in most places, some hollows, but he paused, squinting at the monitor. "There's a void." Rhodes joined him there, near the altar, roughly 10 feet wide, 6 feet deep. "Something's down there in a tunnel." She adjusted the readings, possibly narrow and curved, might connect to an older structure, underground, definitely man-made. Riley's heart thudded, "And it's directly beneath the black stone seal." Rhodes nodded. "Looks that way. Can you break through?" She gave him a sideways look with time. "But you'll need permission." Riley turned to the abbot, who stood just outside the chapel, unreadable. "I need to open it," Riley said. The abbot looked at him for a long moment, then spoke without expression. "Then may God help you when you do." By noon, the chapel smelled of sweat and dust. Dr. Rhodes knelt beside the black stone seal. Her gloves powdered white from the marble dust she'd swept away. The seal was older than the rest of the floor, darker, smoother, embedded deeper than it had any right to be. "This wasn't set by monks," she said, voice low. "This looks industrial modern." Riley crouched beside her. How modern last 50 years? Maybe it's not hand-cut. This was poured and reinforced. Rhodes stood and dusted off her knees. Someone sealed this after the chapel was built, deliberately, like they were trying to keep something in, not out. Riley's stomach turned. Agent Calhoun spoke from the side altar, where he'd been reviewing blueprints and readings. "The tunnel curves away from this room, probably follows. The cliff contour could lead to another structure outside the chapel's footprint." "A crypt," Riley asked, "or a room?" Calhoun replied, "Whatever it is, it's too symmetrical to be natural." Dr. Rhodes adjusted her face shield and grabbed a small electric saw from her kit. "I'm going to score the perimeter. Won't cut deep, just enough to test the integrity." Riley nodded. "Be careful." As the blade began to whir, Riley turned away, walking to the edge of the chapel. He stared at the crucifix above the altar. The figure of Christ hung heavy, the eyes cast downward in stone. Sorrow. It had never comforted him. Not since the hospital. Not since the tubes in his mother's arms, the priest's whisper of God's will, and the silence that followed. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photo. A girl. 9 years old, dark hair and pigtails, smiling through missing teeth. His daughter, gone 4 winters, now hit and run unsolved. He'd stopped praying after that, stopped asking, stopped believing there was anything on the other end of the line, but now here in this place of shadows and stolen names. Something flickered behind his walls. The sound of the saw changed pitch. Dr. Rach stood. "We've got a fracture." She tapped the corner of the seal. A small crack had begun to spread across the black stone. As she tapped again, the crack deepened, spider webbing beneath the surface. Then, with a final hammer tap, the corner collapsed inward. A rush of air surged up from the opening, cold, dry, and ancient. It smelled of dust, but also of iron and something else, decay. Everyone stepped back from the jagged hole in the stone. A dark void stretched downward. A single iron rung was visible on the inside wall, a ladder built into the stone. Riley leaned over the edge, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The beam illuminated stone steps about 10 feet below, then curved out of sight, a stairwell. He muttered, "Not a tunnel, it goes down." Calhoun knelt beside him. "How old is that construction?" Rhodes frowned. "Not 1920s, if that's what you're thinking. These are newer, poured concrete base, reinforced." Riley stood. "I'm going in." Rhodes looked at him sharply. "You can't go alone. We haven't tested the air down there. You don't know if it's safe." "I know I heard something," Riley replied, "and I think whatever happened to Father Maron, it happened down there." He looked towards the abbot, who stood just outside the threshold. Again, his face stone. "You told me the seal was set after a fire." Riley said, "Yes." Jerome replied. When 1972, Riley's brow furrowed. "That's not on any of the records, not on the diocese and registry, not on the construction logs, because it was sealed by the archdiocese directly." Jerome replied, "Not by the monks, it was declared an emergency measure." What kind of emergency? The abbot was silent for a long moment. Then 3 brothers died. 1 vanished. The 4th was found, wandering the corridor, muttering in Latin. They sealed the entrance that same week. Riley stared. "And you never thought that was worth mentioning?" "I thought it was behind us," the abbot said quietly, "until Father Marouin disappeared." Riley turned back to the hole. "Do you have a mask?" he asked. "Rhodes," she nodded. "Industrial-grade filter. You'll need light too, and a backup battery." Within 10 minutes, he was suited up, mask-fitted gloves, on flashlight clipped to his belt, backup in his jacket pocket. "I'll give you 15 minutes, Calhoun said. "Then we call you back up, no exceptions." Riley nodded, and then slowly he lowered himself into the darkness. The air was sharp, metallic like blood. Riley moved down the ladder slowly, boots pressing against the cold stone. The light bobbed ahead of him, revealing the curve of a narrow spiral staircase carved directly into the mountain's bedrock. The deeper he went, the colder it became. No insects, ruts, no moss, just stone and shadow. At the base of the stairs, the passage opened into a narrow corridor. The walls were smooth concrete, not medieval modern. The light flickered against something on the right wall. A painting number, a carving crude, but detailed. A figure in robes, faceless, standing beneath a triangle of stars around it. Words etched in Latin. Riley's Latin was rusty, but he made out a voice crying in the darkness. He swallowed hard and pressed forward. The corridor sloped slightly downward, and after 20 paces he reached a wooden door. It was old, not centuries old, but enough to splinter. He pushed it gently. It creaked open. Beyond it, a chamber, roughly 20 feet wide, a cot, a basin, a crucifix, and a small wooden desk. On the desk, a leather-bound journal. He stepped inside, sweeping the light across the walls. Dozens of carvings, faces, crosses, symbols, prayers scratched into the concrete by hand, some new, some very old. Then he heard it breathing faint from the far corner of the room. He swung the light. Someone was crouched there. A man, face pale, beard, overgrown, robes, stained and torn. His eyes wild and vacant, but familiar. Father Marin Riley, whispered. The man didn't speak. He just began to laugh. The sound of Father Marin's laughter didn't echo it. Absorbed, the concrete chamber seemed to draw it in, muffling it into a grotesque rhythm like the wheezing of a rusted organ. Riley's flashlight trembled slightly in his hand as he stepped closer. Father Thomas Marin, he said, voice calm but firm. You were reported missing 5 days ago. I need you to come with me. The priest didn't respond with words. He laughed again, and then stopped abruptly, eyes snapping toward the beam of light. Too late, he whispered. His voice rasped like something dragged across gravel. Too late to take me out. I'm already in. Riley approached slowly, one hand ready to reach for his radio. The figure in the corner did not rise. He crouched like a penitent or a predator. He was barefoot, his skin chalk white, and his eyes were sunk deep in their sockets, bloodshot and bright. Father Marin Riley tried again. You're safe. You're not under arrest, but I need you to come up with me. I never left. Marin murmured. Riley paused. What do you mean? Marin cocked his head. They think I disappeared, but this is the only place I've ever truly been. It speaks here, in the walls, in the stone. It sings, when no one listens. Riley knelt slowly, flashlight angled down so as not to blind him. He now saw the markings on Marin's forearms. Scratches, dozens of them. Self-inflicted, maybe, or from clawing at stone. What sings? Riley asked gently. The one beneath Marin said, the silence that isn't empty, the hunger that sounds like prayer. Riley felt a chill crawl along his spine. Have you eaten? Do you need water? I drank the salt. Marin said cryptically. But it never quenched. It was a test, don't you see, to separate the flesh from the word. This is trauma, Riley told himself. Sensory deprivation, psychological breakdown, isolation, psychosis. He reached carefully into his coat and pressed the emergency call button on his radio. 3 taps to alert the surface team. Help is coming, he said. Marin laughed again, a dry wheeze. They won't come down here. The abbot forbade it. He always knew what lived beneath our feet. Riley narrowed his eyes. You're saying the abbot knew about this place? He feared this place? Marin corrected. Feared, the voice feared it would use me, but he should have known it only uses the willing. Did you come down here willingly? Marin nodded slowly, then whispered. At first there was a sound from the hallway behind Riley. A footstep. He turned, quickly shining the flashlight toward the open door, but it revealed only the empty corridor beyond. Did you hear that? He asked. Marin didn't respond. His eyes were closed, now mouth moving in a soundless prayer. Riley turned back just in time to see the priest begin to rock forward and backward, a rhythm like waves hitting shore. Then came a whisper, low and distinctly, not Father Marin's voice in Tenebris Deus, dormant in the darkness, God sleeps. Riley's heart thudded hard. Who said that Marin's eyes opened? They were now completely black. Riley staggered backward, but just as suddenly they returned to normal, brown, bloodshot human. Help me, Marin whispered. The voice was not mocking, it was desperate. Riley leaned in again. I'm going to get you out. There's a second room, Marin said weakly. Don't go in it, not without faith. Riley frowned. What's in it? But Marin had closed his eyes again. His breath came shallow. His hands, knotted and dirty, rested in his lap, like a penitent waiting judgment. From the corridor behind them came a new sound, humming. Female, clear, sacred. Riley stood quickly, heart pounding. The hymn was old something, monastic Latin, haunting. It rose and fell like a breath too deep to be human. He stepped to the corridor and shone his light. No one, the hymn continued. He turned to Marin, who now wept silently, she sings. When she's close, the priest whispered. Who but Maron didn't respond. Riley took a step into the hall. The hymn echoed now, not ahead, but behind him. Inside the chamber, he turned back toward the room, just as every carving on the wall rattled the etched crosses, trembling like struck tuning forks. And then silence. Riley's radio crackled to Calhoun's voice. Riley, come in, we're lowering the harness, do you copy? Riley exhaled shakily and pressed his radio. Found Father Marin alive, not well, bringing him up. He moved back to the crouched figure and placed a hand on his shoulder. Time to go. Marin did not resist. Together slowly they stepped into the tunnel, the hymn gone, now replaced by the sound of dripping stone. As they reached the ladder, Marin paused and looked upward. She's beneath the second seal, he whispered. Who is? He didn't answer, but as Riley helped him up toward the shaft of light above, he glanced back into the corridor. Just for a moment, there was someone at the far end, not a monk, a woman veiled, unmoving, but her eyes, two embers in the dark, burned across the distance, and then she was gone. Riley turned back just in time to see the priest begin to rock forward and backward, a rhythm like waves hitting shore. Then came a whisper, low and distinctly, not Father Marin's voice. In tenebris Deus dormant, in the darkness God sleeps. Riley's heart thudded hard. Who said that Marin's eyes opened? They were now completely black. Riley staggered backward, but just as suddenly they returned to normal brown. Bloodshot human, help me, Marin whispered. The voice was not mocking, it was desperate. Riley leaned in again. I'm going to get you out. There's a second room, Marin said weakly. Don't go in it, not without faith. Riley frowned. What's in it? But Marin had closed his eyes again. His breath came shallow, his hands nodded, and Dirty rested in his lap, like a penitent waiting judgment. From the corridor behind them came a new sound, humming. Female, clear, sacred. Riley stood quickly, heart pounding. The hymn was old something, monastic Latin, haunting. It rose and fell like a breath too deep to be human. He stepped to the corridor and shone his light. No one, the hymn continued. He turned to Marin, who now wept silently. She sings when she's close, the priest whispered. Who but Marin didn't respond. Riley took a step into the hall. The hymn echoed now, not ahead, but behind him inside the chamber. He turned back toward the room just as every carving on the wall rattled the etched crosses, trembling like struck tuning forks. And then silence. Riley's radio crackled to Calhoun's voice. Riley, come in, we're lowering the harness, do you copy? Riley exhaled shakily and pressed his radio. Found Father Marin alive, not well, bringing him up. He moved back to the crouched figure and placed a hand on his shoulder. Time to go. Marin did not resist. Together slowly they stepped into the tunnel. The hymn gone, now replaced by the sound of dripping stone. As they reached the ladder, Marin paused and looked upward. She's beneath the second seal, he whispered. Who is? He didn't answer, but as Riley helped him up toward the shaft of light above, he glanced back into the corridor. Just for a moment, there was someone at the far end, not a monk, a woman veiled, unmoving, but her eyes, two embers in the dark, burned across the distance. And then she was gone. Father Marin lay in the infirmary, sedated, his breathing even, but shallow. He hadn't spoken since being brought up from the depths, but he'd scratched something into Riley's hand. Just before the medical team arrived, a word scrolled faintly into his palm, with one broken fingernail below. That was it, no elaboration, no explanation. And Riley couldn't stop thinking about it. It was late afternoon when Abbot Jerome summoned him to the sacristy. The room was dim, its air thick with old incense and older secrets. Stained glass cast bleeding reds and bruised blues across the vestments, neatly folded on open shelves. I want to show you something, the abbot said. Riley didn't speak. He followed the man to a locked drawer beneath the altar, where the abbot retrieved a small dust-covered manuscript bound in cracked leather, a journal, Jerome explained, belonging to one of the monks who died in 1972. Riley took it. The pages were brittle ink, faded, but the handwriting was legible. He flipped through entries of prayers, fasting records, reflections, and then March 3rd, 1972. There's something under the stone. We were not told of it when we came, but the chanting began 3 nights ago, and does not stop even when we cover our ears. March 6th, Brother Elas descended. Last night, the rest of us refused. He said he had dreamed of a woman in white robes, asking for his blood in exchange for knowledge. March 7th, Brother Elas is gone. The latter remains. No one will go? after him. March 9th, the abbot at the time demanded the shaft be sealed. No funeral, no rites, just silence, Riley. Shut the book, you knew. All this, he said. I knew the legends, Jerome replied. I knew. Something was sealed for a reason. I chose not to unseal it. You didn't choose, Riley said coldly. You hid. There was no argument. The abbot placed his hand on the altar and whispered, We do not know if it is a demon or a saint gone mad. Riley stared at him. A Saint Jerome looked away, some say. St. Elios did not die in Rome, that his bones were buried here in these mountains by exiled monks, that his holiness was too dangerous, that he heard too much from God, or something that only called itself God. Riley stepped back. What do you believe? Jerome didn't answer. He simply looked toward the chapel's darkened nave and murmured, She sings, in Latin. That is what they all say, even the mad ones. That evening, the monks gathered again, this time in the cloister. Walk under the open sky. Riley stood before them, the cracked leather journal in his hand, and the words of a dead monk burning in his mind. Someone built another chamber, he said, beneath the one. I found the original staircase goes deeper. A second seal. Has anyone ever seen it? No one responded. Brother Gabriel stood off to one side, his eyes darting between shadows. Riley walked toward him. Gabriel, you heard her, didn't you? The young monk nodded slowly. What did she say? Gabriel's lips trembled. She asked if I still remembered my name. Riley's skin prickled. And do you? A long pause, then I'm not sure. A shiver passed through the monks like wind. Brother Clement stepped forward. There is one among us who has seen the second seal. Riley turned. Who? The group parted. An older monk stepped forward, tall, gaunt, silent. His eyes were closed. Riley recognized him from the first night. The mute Brother Anselm. He cannot speak, Clement said. He took a vow. After what he saw, Riley approached him slowly. Brother Anselm, I need your help. What's below the second seal? Anselm opened his eyes, then raised his hand. He traced a symbol into the air, a circle enclosed by 4 points like a compass or a cross. Then he touched his chest and pointed downward to the earth, to what lay beneath. Riley stared. What does that mean? Clement's voice was barely above a whisper. It means she is waiting. That night. Riley returned to the guest room and locked the door. He couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the hymn, not sung aloud, but remembered a haunting melody echoing in his memory, threaded with dread at 2:13 a. His radio crackled. Riley, you awake? It was Agent Calhoun. Riley grabbed the radio. I'm here. You'd better come down to the chapel. Calhoun said we were packing up equipment and we found another door hidden behind the northern altar stone slab, same markings as the first seal. Riley was already pulling on his coat. 10 minutes later, he was back inside the chapel with Calhoun. And Rhodes, they showed him the slab. It was narrow, vertical, concealed behind a false panel of stonework, nearly invisible, unless you knew to look. Can we open it? Riley asked. Rhodes grimaced. If you want. But whatever's behind it, it's not on any of the ground scans. How's that possible? Because either it's shielded by a different kind of material, she said slowly, or it's not really there. Riley touched the stone. It was warm, not the chill of mountain rock. It throbbed faintly beneath his fingers like a pulse. And faintly, impossibly, a voice so quiet it wasn't heard, only known. Come further, Matthew. His breath caught. It had said his name. He stepped back. No one touches this seal, he said, harassedly. Not until I say. He turned and left the chapel. The door shut behind him with a dull thud. Inside the chamber, the slab remained still, but beneath it the hymn began again. The following morning arrived without sunrise. A low fog curled around the monastery, like the folds of an uncleaned shroud. It clung to the bell tower, drifted across the cloister walk, and seeped into the chapel. Through every cracked stone and weathered frame, Riley sat in the sacristy, staring at the second journal retrieved by Brother Clement, a relic kept under lock for over 50 years. Its existence known only to 3 men in the monastery. It had been written by the last abbot, before Jerome, Father Ambrosius, a scholar and theologian of austere reputation, who vanished in 1973. The first entry was dated the night after the first descent into the lower vault, August 2nd, 1972. We were fools to open it. I no longer believe it is a saint's resting place. The chanting begins at midnight and ends only with the Angeles, but the voices are not prayers, August. Third, there is something behind the stone. Beyond the second seal, I asked Brother Elas what he saw. He said he saw a woman with wings made of fire, who wept blood from her eyes. He has not spoken since August 4th. The altar was found covered in ash this morning. No fire, no incense lit, just ash, no footprints, just the residue and the smell. That terrible smell of roses rotting in meat. Riley turned the page. August 5th. It claims to be a messenger, but messengers do not ask for blood. They do not take names from the mouths of the living and whisper them into the stone. They do not echo my thoughts before I speak them aloud. There was no August 6th. There was no final entry, just a smeared page darkened with ink, and something red-brown. Dried aged, it ended in a half-scrolled sentence. The light burns down here. And when I pray it laughs, Riley let the book fall closed, across from him. Clement watched silently. You've read this, Riley asked. I have, and yet you remained. Clement nodded. So long as it stayed sealed, it was harmless. You're not convinced of that anymore. No, Clement admitted, I'm not. Riley stood pacing. It's not just a presence, he muttered. It knows things. It knew my name. It knew Marin. It's singing to the others now. Some of them listen, Clement said quietly. Some don't even realise they are. Riley stopped. How far does it go? Clement took a deep breath. Farther than you think. That evening, Riley returned to the chapel with Calhoun and Dr. Rhodes. The second seal still stood untouched, the vertical slab flush with the altar wall, covered now in Latin inscriptions that hadn't been visible the day before. Calhoun held up a camera. This isn't graffiti, it's engraved. How is that possible? Rhodes knelt beside the base of the slab. It's not machine cut either. These markings, they weren't chiseled by hand. What do they say? Riley asked. Calhoun read aloud. Custodium oium inferni, I guard the gate of hell, Rhodes muttered. Charming, Riley felt the air press in against his chest, and yet we keep coming back to open it. He stepped closer and placed a hand on the stone. This time there was no pulse, only a presence, something so vast and so quiet that it swallowed thought. In that silence, Riley felt something in his mind, not a voice, not words, but intention, like a spider brushing against the web of his soul, and with that came a vision, a desert, a woman kneeling in white, surrounded by black-winged angels, her mouth sewn shut with gold thread, a priest kneeling before her, offering his own tongue. On a silver plate, the sun split in half above them. Bleeding fire, he pulled his hand away, gasping. Calhoun caught him. You all right? Riley nodded slowly, wiping cold sweat from his brow. It's not just a seal, it's a door. Rhodes stood and backed away from it. Then maybe we shouldn't be here when someone opens it. Riley looked at her, then said almost to himself, but someone already did. That night, Brother Gabriel was found unconscious in the garden, kneeling beneath the statue of St. Ilios. A deep circle of ash surrounded him. He bore no injuries, but when he awoke hours later in the infirmary, he spoke only one phrase. I know the name now. The final scene of the chapter is from Father Marin's bedside. He wakes briefly, staring not at the nurses nor the ceiling, but toward the stone wall opposite him, as if something there was speaking. His lips move soundless, but a nurse leans in. Lip reading from his cracked mouth, she writes down what she sees him say later. She passes the note to Riley. The paper reads, "It is not a demon, it is a saint that never died, and she is hungry for the faithful." The fog did not lift. Not in the morning, nor the hours that followed. It thickened, pressing against the stained glass windows, until the sanctuary light inside St. Ilios turned sickly and dim. Riley stood at the edge of the chapel, staring at the second seal. He hadn't slept, not really. The dream still clung to him like cobwebs. His daughter had been in it. But not as he remembered. He was in the monastery garden. Moonlight painting silver across the olive branches. His daughter Ellie stood barefoot among the rose bushes, her little white dress soaked to the knees. She was humming the same hymn he'd heard from below. He called her name, but she didn't answer. He walked closer. She turned. Only it wasn't Ellie anymore. It was a woman, veiled, eyes closed, and when she opened them, they burned. Not metaphorically, they burned. Fire spilled down her cheeks like tears, and from her mouth came the words, "Your grief is a door. Matthew and I have the key." He awoke choking, not from fear, from smoke. There had been no fire, no source, just the scent of burnt roses, now in the morning's false light. Riley paced the hallway between cloister and chapel. The monks were gathered silently, for lauds, but their eyes were hollow. Gabriel had not returned to normal since his episode, and worse, Brother Pass was missing. The old monk, nearly blind, but spiritually steadfast, had not appeared for morning meal, nor answered his cell door. The abbot had tried to reassure the others, Perhaps he wondered, he has grown confused before. But Riley knew better. He knew what people looked like when they vanished. He had seen it on the faces of parents, clutching school portraits, on the expressions of grieving mothers who only found shoes. He felt it again now. Pius was gone. And not by accident, he found Jerome alone in the library, hunched over an old book of early church apocrypha. "We need to lock the chapel." Riley said. The abbot didn't look up. "You cannot lock the house of God then." "I'll do it myself. Pius is missing." "That's two, maybe more, if Gabriel slips away again." Jerome finally raised his eyes. "And what good will that do? It'll keep them from going near the seal." Jerome shook his head. "You think this is a place you can barricade, but you don't understand. The danger isn't down there anymore." Riley froze. "What do you mean?" The abbot's voice dropped. It has always known how to speak to those who suffer first. It whispered into the monks, then it sang. "Now it dreams." Riley remembered the woman with burning eyes. "What is it?" Jerome answered slowly, choosing each word as if it cost him something. "A saint forgotten by Rome, a prophet whose holiness was not safe, who was buried under silence until we began to listen again." Riley's voice was dry. "You're saying it's divine. I'm saying holiness and horror often speak the same language." He returned to his guest cell and locked the door. The journal from Father Ambrosius lay open on the desk. He flipped through the middle entries until he found it. "The woman who weeps fire said something last night. She called me by the name I bore as a child, a name I had not spoken in 40 years. She said she could heal the grief I carried if I let her wear my skin. When I refused, she wept, and her tears cracked the stone of the crypt. I do not know how long I can say no." Riley closed the book and stood. He reached for the small silver cross he'd worn around his neck since childhood, and for the first time in years he prayed. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't rehearsed, it was just a name. Ellie. He didn't ask for a sign, he didn't beg for mercy. He just said her name, and let the silence answer. And it did, but not with peace, with a voice quiet and crawling that pressed into the folds of his mind like smoke. "She's not gone, just misplaced." Riley staggered backward. No one had spoken, but the voice had been real. He was no longer just investigating. He was being studied in return. At midnight, the monastery trembled only for a moment, a distant, subtle vibration like thunder. Below ground, every monk awoke. Some began to pray aloud. Others clutched their crucifixes. Riley rushed to the chapel. The second seal had cracked. A thin fracture ran from top to bottom, faintly glowing with soft golden light. Someone had left a note beside it. No signature, just 4 words. "I opened it once." The monastery did not speak of the quake, not aloud. The monks carried on, as if the tremor had been a dream or a test. They recited their prayers with extra precision, their chants sharper, more deliberate, but in their eyes Riley saw what they feared, to admit the seal had moved. And once something moves, it does not stop. Riley stood again at the foot of the second seal. The fracture glowed faintly, though no natural light could explain it. Dr. Rhodes had taken samples of the stone run tests in the refectory with portable scanners, but the readings made no sense. "There's no heat source," she'd said, eyebrows pinched in confusion. "No radiation, no electricity, and yet it glows. Is it leaking something?" Calhoun had asked. Rhodes only stared. "Light." She said. "It's leaking light now with the chapel empty." Riley brushed his fingers against the crack. A warmth bled through it, not physical, emotional. He felt recognized, accounted for. The feeling was so intimate, so invasive, it frightened him. More than any threat, he turned and saw Brother Anselm, waiting in the nave, silent as always. Eyes like glass, the monk beckoned him in the scriptorium. Anselm laid out an ancient map on a table scarred by centuries of candle burn. It was a diagram of the monastery, drawn in ink, that had long faded to brown. But the most important part wasn't the buildings. It was beneath them, a branching series of tunnels, vaults, and hollow chambers, all radiating out from the original site of the first altar. A primitive chapel from the 14th century, since destroyed. Riley traced a line from the current chapel to a shaded area labelled only Memorialia Sancta Memory of the St. Riley, translated aloud. Anselm nodded. He pointed to that chamber, then to Riley, then to the seal. He didn't need words, it all led there. That night Riley returned with Calhoun, and Rhodes Gabriel came too, against the abbot's wishes. The boy was pale but determined. "I've heard her voice," he said softly. "If I don't go down, I think she'll find another way in." The seal did not resist them. It had already begun to pull away from the wall behind it. A spiral descent honed into bedrock, unlit, unwelcoming. Calhoun muttered, This wasn't on any radar scan. Rhodes checked her readings again. It still isn't. Riley clipped his flashlight to his jacket and stepped through the stairs. Curved for what felt like hours, the air grew colder, but not damp, sterile, almost sacred, like entering a church untouched by time. And then at last the stair opened into a chamber not carved built. The walls were smooth stone, black-veined marble, and obsidian inlaid with geometric markings that resembled both prayer wheels and eyes. In the centre of the chamber, a sarcophagus, black, sealed with silver bands upon it, a single word etched in Latin, veritas truth, no name, no relics. Just that Rhodes stepped forward. This wasn't constructed by medieval monks. Calhoun circled it more like early 20th century reinforced steel modern alloys. Someone really wanted this shut. Gabriel knelt beside the base, whispering words in Latin under his breath. Riley looked at him. "What are you doing praying?" the boy said. "So she doesn't take me." Rhodes turned to Riley. "You think this is St. Elios?" Riley shook his head. "I think this is what he found, or what found him." Riley blinked. The room changed. He wasn't standing anymore. He was kneeling. The sarcophagus was open inside it, not a skeleton. A woman alive, eyes closed, breathing slow and deep. Her body was clothed in woven linen and iron threads, bound like a relic but whole, and her lips moved in prayer. He stepped closer. He knew her face. He didn't know how, but he knew it, the face from his dream, the burning eyes, the veiled prophet. The voice behind the hymn. She opened her eyes and said, "The church buried me, so they would not have to listen." Back in the vault, Riley staggered back, gasping. The others stared at him. Calhoun reached for his shoulder. "You all right?" Riley wiped sweat from his brow. "I saw her, the one who sings. She's not dead, she's waiting." Rhodes stared at the sarcophagus. "Then the question is, do we open it?" Gabriel looked up from his prayers. "No," he whispered. "She opens you." The vault had been closed again. They had sealed the stairwell behind them with caution, but no illusions. What was beneath the second seal wasn't hidden anymore. Not truly. It had been seen, it had been remembered, and memory, Riley knew, was its own kind of summoning. 3 days passed. In those days, Brother Gabriel no longer prayed aloud. Brother Anselm disappeared entirely. The abbot called no assemblies. The chapel bells rang once at midnight, without wind or hands to pull them, and Riley stopped trusting mirrors. On the third morning, Riley stood at the sink in the infirmary's washroom, cupping water to his face, trying to scrub away the endless haze of dream and waking visions. He looked up into the mirror, and his reflection smiled. He had not. It was small, subtle but real, and then his reflection raised its hand slowly, while Riley stayed still. It placed one finger to its lips. Riley punched the glass, shattering it into a starburst. He did not scream, he did not cry, but later that morning he rapped, his right hand in gauze, and told the monks. He tripped on the chapel steps. No one questioned it. They all knew the stone was shifting beneath their feet. Clement came to him that afternoon. He carried the journal of Father Ambrosius, again open to an entry. No one had dared read aloud before. She is not a saint, nor a demon, but a voice caught between a prophet, silenced by doctrine, a spirit too holy to burn, too wild to canonize. So they buried her beneath 2 seals, one of stone, one of forgetting. Clement closed the book. You've heard her, haven't you? Riley nodded. She called herself Truth, he said. Clement grimaced. She'll say anything to be believed. That's what voices do. But it felt right. Riley admitted it wasn't evil. It felt like grief, ancient grief. That's how it begins. Clement placed something in Riley's hand, a coin old and blackened with a woman's face carved on one side. Mouth stitched shut, halo of flame. This was worn by monks who tended the lowest chamber. It's a symbol of silence. Riley turned it over. Did it work? Clement looked away. No. That night, Brother Gabriel sat alone in the garden. He was humming again, not the hymn this time, something older, something without melody. Riley approached slowly. Gabriel. The young monk looked up, eyes distant. She doesn't need doors anymore, he whispered. What do you mean she's inside now? Inside names, inside memory, inside anything hollow enough to echo. Riley's heart thudded. Gabriel touched his own chest. I prayed so hard to forget my sins. I didn't realize she lives in forgetting. Then he stood and walked towards the chapel, and the door opened for him before he touched it. By morning, 3 monks refused to leave their cell. One was found curled in the corner of the kitchen, whispering his mother's name over and over. The abbot called a private meeting with Clement and Riley. I believe Jerome said that we are dealing with something older than even the church, a voice exiled from heaven. Before the devil ever fell, Not wicked, not holy, simply uncontainable. Riley leaned forward. You think it's breaking through again? Jerome didn't answer at first, then he whispered, No, detective. I think we let it in. That night, Riley returned to the chapel one last time. The altar was bare, the crucifix gone in its place. A mirror not hung, not mounted, just standing where the cross had been, a full-length antique mirror. Riley approached it slowly. He saw himself, but older, ash smeared on his cheeks, eyes glowing faintly gold behind him. In the reflection, a woman stood veiled radiant, but when he turned, no one. And in the glass she whispered, You are ready to speak for me. Then her reflection reached out and touched his shoulder. He felt it, he fell to his knees, and for the first time in 20 years, he wept not for his daughter, but for himself. The next morning, Riley found a book that shouldn't exist. It was waiting for him in his guest quarters, placed deliberately on the desk, atop his folded coat. He hadn't left it there. No one had access, there were no footsteps. In the dust, no trace at all, just the book bound in what felt like untreated vellum. The pages smelled of ash and rosemary. No title, no author on the first page, a single phrase written in a delicate ancient hand. Those who remember become vessels. Riley turned the page, the next was blank. He turned again, blank, dozens of them. But on the 50th page, writing began, names all in Latin, but one stood out, written in English, in a different hand. His daughter's name, Eleanor Grace Riley. His breath stopped. He touched the ink, it smeared, still wet. He slammed the book shut. The chapel bells rang. Once later that day, brother, Gabriel came to Riley's door barefoot, expression strangely serene. She's asked me to walk the lower vault, he said calmly. You're not going down there, Riley snapped. Gabriel shook his head. It's not down, not anymore, it's inside now. Gabriel, I'm not afraid, detective. I thought I was, but it's not death that waits, it's clarity. Riley grabbed his arm. You're not well, that thing, whatever it is, it's manipulating you. Gabriel looked him dead in the eyes and said, Is truth manipulation, if it hurts? He left the room and disappeared about Jerome summoned Riley. That evening, his robes were unfastened. His hands shook. Clement's gone. He whispered what? I found his cell empty, his bed untouched, but the chapel door was ajar inside. He handed Riley a torn piece of parchment, written in crimson ink. The first word was not spoken, it was remembered. Riley stared. What does that mean? Jerome whispered, it means it didn't need a mouth, it only needed memory. He sat down, suddenly older. Do you believe Matthew Riley didn't answer? You must before it calls your name back into the dark that night. Riley returned to the chapel. The mirror remained where the altar had once stood, but now someone had drawn a circle of ash around it. Inside the circle, 4 candles, all burning steadily. Without flicker, he stepped to the edge. The reflection showed himself in robes, monastic hands folded, but his lips were stitched shut. He reached out a hand toward the glass. His reflection did the same, but the moment their fingers touched, he felt heat, and something behind the mirror moved, not a reflection, a shadow. She's almost through, a voice said. Riley turned. Father Maron stood in the doorway, alive, steady, but changed, no longer hollow-eyed or trembling. He looked sanctified and afraid. She needs a speaker. Maron said someone who's lost something so deep they'll say anything. Just to fill the silence, Riley swallowed hard. And you think that's me? I know it's you that night in his room. Riley dreamt again, but it wasn't a dream. He stood in the vault again, alone. The sarcophagus was open, and inside, instead of a body, a book pages blank, waiting a quill, floated above it, and the voice, clear, sacred, warm, said, Write what they refused, speak what they sealed. I gave you pain, so you'd be hollow enough to carry me. Riley stepped forward, picked up the quill, and just before he wrote the first word, he woke with ink on his fingers. The wind howled that night, but none of the trees moved. It was not weather, it was her breath. Riley found himself in the old confessional beside the chapel. Not by intention, but as if led, the small wooden box still bore the faint scent of incense and sweat. A place where generations had whispered guilt into the dark. He slid into the priest's side and waited for what he wasn't sure. Then footsteps. The other door creaked open. Someone entered the penitent's booth. No voice, just breathing. Then finally, bless me, Father. For I remember. Riley's blood turned to ice. Not I have sinned. I remember. Who are you? He whispered, a pause, then soft and impossibly sad. I was the first. He tried to speak again, but the breathing stopped. The booth was empty. The wood still warm at dawn. Gabriel returned. He walked into the refectory calmly, barefoot, pale. Every monk stopped eating. He walked to the centre of the room and placed a single item on the table, a finger bone wrapped in a strip of cloth, inscribed with Latin, the inscription, Re adverb co facto est, and the word was made flesh. Brother Clement's handwriting. Gabriel smiled faintly. She let me keep part of him, he said, to help us remember. Then he sat and resumed eating, as if nothing had happened. No one spoke, no one moved, but later that morning Riley found a third monk missing. Marin sought Riley out in the East Cloister. I've remembered too much, he said without preamble, and she's pleased. Riley stared. You're not making sense. I can walk again, speak again, I sleep without pain. My hands no longer tremble. That's good. Marin looked at him with haunted eyes. Number. That's dangerous. He placed something into Riley's hands. A relic, a knotted rosary, not made of beads but teeth. Children's teeth. She gives gifts, Marin said, but they cost more than pain. Riley dropped it, as if it burned. I'm leaving, Marin said, before she decides I'm worth keeping. And he did before nightfall. He was never seen again. That night, Riley walked to the monastery alone. The halls whispered now, not voices, not words, his name over and over. Sometimes in his daughter's voice, sometimes in his own, sometimes in voices that hadn't spoken in centuries. He returned to the mirror in the chapel. Now his reflection was gone. Only the woman remained, veiled eyes, closed mouth, moving without sound, until he whispered, Tell me your name. She opened her eyes and said, You already know it. Suddenly Riley remembered the book, the dream, the quill, the blank pages. He spoke aloud. Memorialia. The mirror shattered in the chapel wall where no door had ever been before. A crack appeared. It pulsed. Riley pressed his hand to it. It opened beyond it. A stair spiralling downward, not into stone but into lightless air. It smelled like burnt myrrh and dying stars. He stepped inside and began to descend. The stairs were not made of stone. They were carved from memory. Each step pulsed faintly, with something that could not be seen, only recalled as Riley descended. He felt things surface in his mind that hadn't been there a moment before, the shape of his mother's handwriting, the smell of his daughter's hair after rain, the exact pressure of the bullet that shattered the spine of the boy he couldn't save. He gripped the railing, though there wasn't one, just a sensation of steadiness, and the further down he went, the quieter the world became. Not silent, just full, like a library so ancient and sacred that to speak would be to desecrate every word it held. The staircase ended in a chamber without wall. It stretched endlessly, in all directions, yet was as only the size of a cathedral. Riley stood at the threshold. There was no floor, just an expanse of grey fog. Dense but walkable footsteps made no sound at the centre of this impossible space. Stood a stone lectern upon it, the book, the same one from his vision, the book of unwritten names, pages still blank. Waiting beside it stood her, not the woman from the mirror, not the veiled saint. This was someone else. Memorialia, no face, no features, just a robe made of woven prayers, a crown of thorn silence. She spoke without mouth. You came to remember? Riley took a step forward. I came to understand. She turned a page in the book, names spilled across it, in ink that moved like oil on the water. Some were names he recognised, his daughter, his own brother Clement, even the abbot, and some were not names at all, but feelings that had been named: shame, faith, abandonment, hope. You are my vessel, she said. No, Riley said. I'm not your priest, I don't believe in you, but you remember me, she said, gently, and that is enough. Riley stared at the book. He reached forward and turned a page at the bottom. A single phrase still forming. The man who killed your daughter. His hand stopped. The next word appeared. Knew her name. He was not random. He was part of the memory. I have lost. Riley's vision blurred. You're lying. I do not lie, Memoria said. I remember. The book shimmered, and from its pages a photograph unfolded. A man, dark coat, familiar, standing beside a car wreck. Smiling, Riley's mouth dried. It was one of his old suspects, a man who disappeared during the trial. A man the system had forgotten. Because the system chose to. You want me to become like you, Riley whispered. You want me to carry the names the world refuses. Yes, she said, as Ilios did, as every saint who was silenced. And if I refuse, she pointed across the fog. A second. Riley stood, mouth sewn shut, eyes, golden hands folded in prayer. Then you become what you tried to forget. The book opened again, blank page, a quill hovered. Write, she said, or be forgotten. Riley hesitated, then picked up the quill. He scrolled one word, Ellie. The book shimmered and her name burned bright. Not in pain in presence, he felt her laugh. Not from beyond, from within. He dropped the pen and the fog began to rise. Riley awoke on the chapel floor covered in ash. The mirror was gone. The altar-restored sunlight spilled through the broken glass. Outside the fog was lifting. Gabriel stood beside him. Silent, is she gone? Riley asked. Gabriel didn't speak, but in the rafters above them a faint voice sang. Software gentle remembered the monastery emptied slowly first, the novices, then the old monks, their eyes too tired to stare at shadows that stared back. Eventually even the abbot left. He said no words to Riley as he departed, only placed his rosary on the chapel steps, kissed the lentil, and vanished into the dawn fog. Gabriel remained, so did Riley. The altar was restored, but the mirror's absence had left an imprint the chapel felt aware, not haunted, not hallowed, just attentive, as if it was waiting for someone to speak. That evening, Riley sat alone in the scriptorium and wrote a letter, not to the Vatican, not to the agency, not to the press, to his daughter. Ellie, I don't know if where you are is a place that receives letters, but if you're listening, I want you to know something. I found her, the one who remembers the one the church buried, so no one would have to carry the weight of things they didn't want to face. She knew your name, she showed it to me, not as a wound, but as proof you were never forgotten. Not by me, not by the world, and certainly not by her. I will carry that now, as long as I live, because I remember. He folded it, lit a candle, and let the flame take it on the final morning. Riley packed nothing. He stood outside the monastery gates, staring into a world that hadn't changed. And yet everything had. Gabriel approached with a small bundle. What's this? Riley asked. Gabriel unwrapped it, the book of unwritten names, only. Now it wasn't blank, a single page was filled one name. Matthew Riley, witness bearer speaker. She wants you to remember, Gabriel said softly. But only if you choose. Riley stared down at it. Will she keep speaking? Gabriel looked up toward the mountain. She doesn't have to. We all do it for her now later, that year. Riley returned to the city. He didn't resume his old job. Instead, he began visiting old cases, mothers who'd lost children, men who lived with guilt, priests too broken to preach. He sat with them, not to fix them, not to convert them, only to say, "You're not forgotten." Some wept, some smiled, some said nothing at all, but when he left, he always whispered a name. And in the quiet after, if someone listened closely, they might hear a soft voice echo it back, not in their ears, in their memory. Years later, a chapel somewhere in northern Italy burned to the ground. They found no bodies, no cause, only a single object in the ashes, a mirror, perfect, unbroken, and behind its glass not a reflection, a name, yours, mine, ours, waiting to be remembered.